Hello, and welcome to the Modern Industrialist Exchange podcast, where we explore the innovations and strategies driving industrial progress forward. Industrial operations are entering a new era. The pressure is everywhere. Aging infrastructure, workforce turnover, fragmented systems, rising operational complexity, new expectations around AI and digital transformation. But in asset-heavy industries, technology alone is not the answer. The companies getting this right are building systems that actually work for the people closest to the operation: the inspectors, the welders, the frontline leaders responsible for keeping the business moving every single day. Today's guest is James Chapman. He spent his career operating at the center of those challenges. James most recently served in senior operational leadership roles at GATX, one of the largest railcar leasing and maintenance operations in North America. During his time there, he helped lead continuous improvement efforts across a massive maintenance network, responsible for keeping more than 100,000 rail cars moving safely and efficiently across the rail system. Before rail, James worked across automotive, aerospace, and industrial manufacturing environments. That experience shaped a deeply practical approach to operational excellence, continuous improvement, and technology adoption. In this conversation, we explore what operational excellence actually looks like inside complex industrial environments. We talk about frontline leadership, daily management systems, continuous improvement culture, and why some of the most important operational insights come from leaders spending time where the work is actually happening. We also dig into the realities of industrial modernization, fragmented inspection systems, decades of engineering documentation, and the challenge of balancing off-the-shelf software versus custom-built tools. We talk about how GATX approached digitization in ways designed to reduce friction for workers while improving operational performance. One theme, I think, kept surfacing throughout this discussion. It's the idea that the best industrial transformation efforts are about helping experienced operators do their jobs better. If you care about continuous improvement, industrial technology, operational leadership, and the future of modernization in asset-heavy industries, this conversation's for you. Let's get into it. James, welcome to the Modern Industrialist Exchange podcast. Great to see you, man.
Good to see you as well.
So I think we were last together in person back in March, right? At the American Manufacturing Summit?
That's correct.
Yeah, that was a good time. I think I had the fuller beard going at that point. I've trimmed it back.
Change it up.
Yeah, trying to be like a little streamlined for spring. But, we were together and we actually did a case study on stage at the event, talking about some of the things that TXI and you had done together at GATX. I think we both had the idea that this would be a fun topic to bring to the broader modern industrialist exchange community. So that's what we're going to get into today. Let's start simply. Just to give the audience a little bit of context, would love to just hear a little bit about what kind of experience you brought into your arrival at GATX. I want to say that prior, your background had been in automotive and some high automation manufacturing. How did that kind of develop your mental model of thinking about problems and how you entered GATX?
Yeah, so I did definitely spend a couple years in automotive where we were 4 hours from Ford and 121 inventory turns on an assembly line that 45 seconds every part was being done. Yeah. But I also worked in aircraft, building helicopter wings and dental x-ray, doing high dollar, low volume assembly, as well as electrical hand tools. Probably the biggest thing that I brought to GATX was that ability to ask questions, kind of take a look at manufacturing. Where are we struggling? What's our bottleneck? What are we looking to achieve? And what do we need to do better? And kind of that firsthand approach of saying, okay, all these processes are different. Some have higher automation, some have less, but ultimately we all have problems. And a lot of times you'll find some of the bottlenecks, some of the issues, they tend to repeat themselves. And It's really digging in and asking questions about where those problems exist.
And what was your role at GATX, and how was that natural affinity towards asking questions relevant? What were you actually doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so when I started with them, I was the director of continuous improvement. We're trying to really get continuous improvement, lean manufacturing going. I started with daily management and deploying strategy deployment. From there, it really evolved. And in 2016, I took over as vice president of North American Service Centers. And when I left in 2025, I was in charge of all of GATX's owned operations, locomotive as well as railcar maintenance.
Talking a little bit about GATX, it's really a massive company. I want to say there's something like 115,000 rail cars just in North America. I think the name maybe resonates for folks who have like frequently gone past, a freight line or a freight yard. But I think some context for the audience, like your perspective of GATX and what it is they do and what makes the business run.
Yeah. So a little bit of background, right? I think once I tell people what GATX is and what they do, no one looks at a train the same way because they have those four little letters on the side, and you can tell whose they are and who owns them. So GATX is a railcar leasing company. They own about 115,000 railcars. They entered a joint venture, which almost doubled their fleet, which I think concluded this year. The way it works is there are the railroads who move the cars. There are people who have the commodity and manufacture it, and they actually are the ones trying to ship it. They may own some of their own rail cars, but a large portion are leased or rented fleet. And that's where a company like GATX would come in as an asset management type company. And so they own the rail car, they lease it to the supplier or the company making the raw product and making sure that it gets from point A to point B. And so part of that is with that many rail cars, you've got to have maintenance. Otherwise, you're just a bank or some financial institution. And so GATX had a pretty extensive maintenance network that maintained their rail cars, particularly tank cars, as those have the higher demand because they have certain qualification cycles and as a pressure vessel. Another way to think about it is like an auto body shop. Very comparable. If you drive a car every day, it's going to need oil changes, and every once in a while you get in an accident. Well, it's very similar to a rail car. Sometimes there are accidents, sometimes there are, just due cycles. Brakes need to be changed, wheels need to be changed. The tank, a pressure vessel needs to be checked. Linings need to be reapplied. And so those type of things would all be done in the maintenance network. And that's how GATX really became a differentiator, is maximizing their maintenance network to combine with their leasing of rail cars.
Yeah, because fundamentally the business model is that GATX makes money when those cars are out there carrying loads, right? So optimizing the business means having your cars out there working hard for you and running, and maintenance naturally figures into optimizing that, right?
Completely, right? You want to make sure you're maximizing the event, getting the work that needs to be done because you don't want multiple shoppings. Just getting a car in and out of the shop can take time, weeks for a railroad to deliver a car. And then secondarily, if it's in a shop for 30, 60, 90, 120 days, that's all time that a car's not getting maybe abatement on rent, as well as, those are opportunities where we could be leasing a rail car and we're not. And so you want to make sure that you're, one, doing a good job, making sure everything that needs to get fixed is getting fixed and done well. And then you want to do it as fast as possible to get that rail car back on the tracks.
As you were acclimating to GATX, was there an element of the operation that was different from what you were expecting or more complex than you anticipated coming from a very different background? Was something that kind of surprised or stood out to you about what continuous improvement was going to need to mean in this type of environment?
It's funny. It's actually more similar than not. As you really get into it, we start with daily management in a lot of the places I've done, and because that starts the conversation. And so, yeah, the specific problems, the specific details may be a little different, but having that conversation about let's align on what our goals are, what does winning look like, what's good, what's bad, making sure everybody from the highest levels all the way down to the person striking an arc and putting a weld on a rail car know exactly what winning and losing look like, and give them the power and that ability at daily management to have that conversation and say, we lost yesterday because, the jack didn't work, or my equipment went down, or I was unclear on the instructions, those type of conversations. So then we can put together action items, develop plans, and the things that we can fix easy, we do. And the things that are harder or more difficult, we put into bigger plans and start to think about how we go after those opportunities.
I love how you're describing this with a very firsthand understanding that comes from time that you spent, walking the yard. For our audience, talk a little bit about why that aspect of how you approach this and how that fit into your management style, and like how that helped you deliver successfully in the role.
Yeah, I was taught the mantra of go see, ask why, show respect. And really, it's about the person who knows the problem is the person who's doing the work. And so if on paper you can see a metric, you can see this, there's a problem there. And so fundamentally, I know where to look from a chart, from a spreadsheet. But really, in order to figure that out, I need to go look, go watch the operations and understand that. And, from the beginning, I took part in Kaizens, was on the floor, was doing different things, asking people to engage. And part of that is my willingness to engage with them. That means asking questions. And sometimes it means I look foolish if I don't know exactly what's going on. But it also means that they know that I'm comfortable looking foolish and asking questions and telling them everything I know. And so that honesty and transparency around, hey, let's figure this out together. Let's really be a culture that works on actions and change versus wondering, why things are the way they are. Let's find the problems we have and let's fix it and complete it. Because really, you only get better with what you actually complete. And so that's the key. That's what I've driven with everything I've done. And you march that all the way up the line. You make sure that everybody within the facility is willing to ask questions. Shop floor, the supervisor, the production manager, the quality manager, the EH&S manager, the plant manager, everybody's willing to ask questions, challenge, even me, right? And say, why are we doing this? Why shouldn't we do this instead? And we talk about it and we figure out the best course. And then we really try and drive towards completion.
I love what you said there in terms of the willingness to ask a question that might make you look uninformed, or I think even foolish was the word that you used, because I think that is just another way of delivering on that three-part that you shared of showing respect, right? Being willing to put yourself in a position of not being the expert and deferring to other people's expertise and asking questions and types of questions in certain ways, a very powerful way of doing that.
Yeah. No, I've always thought that. And when you really want a continuous improvement culture, you've got to ask questions and get people to think and challenge and think for themselves. And so if you can create that culture where they're trying to think about the problem, they're trying to justify it, and they're passionate about the solution, it's almost better sometimes if someone comes up with a better idea than I do, because it's their idea then. And if it's their idea, then I can support them to complete it. And now they're driven and motivated to get that done and prove that it's successful. And so really, you want to make sure that it's a team involvement and that you really have that buy-in and that people are empowered to make that change, because then they want to see it be successful and they really want to see the results. And as the VP person in charge, I'm just making sure that their vision comes true, right? As they see that opportunity, they are driving to make sure that they get it done and completed. And I'm helping them remove roadblocks and then holding them accountable to make sure it's really done. Not 80%, but 100%, so that they really truly see the results that they want to see. And in that, you get a lot of pride and sense of accomplishment. And as you start with littler things, you start to get bigger things and bigger things and bigger things. And now you start to really create a continuous improvement culture when almost the changes are so many. People see all the opportunities. They see all the things they should be doing. And so then the difficulty becomes is how do you narrow people's focus into one or two things and really get them done?
Yeah. A big part of our process at TXI involves direct observation, asking questions, getting out there. And that's really where the TXI and GATX relationship started. We came out to one of the maintenance facilities and walked the yard with you and your team and got into the details of what was happening there. We brought interface designers and engineers and data scientists, not folks you typically have walking a railroad maintenance yard. What were some of the things that, as our teams were out there working and walking together, that started to bubble up to the surface as possible areas for improvement?
Well, all the systems we had, part of the reason we called them TXI is, GATX became more a continuous improvement culture within the operations. The problem is as you open your eyes and you see all those opportunities, there's a lot of them. And especially in the IT department, we had tons of projects. We had a huge project funnel, and that was only in the operations group. That didn't count commercial sales, who were also frustrated that they had a lot to do. And so I was trying to think of how do we get all this done? Good projects, have payback, make sense, but how do we accomplish all this in a reasonable amount of time with the bandwidth, with all the things that we want to do? So I think that was a big part of getting TXI out there. And we think about our inspection process. We had 3, 4 different systems. Every inspector had 2 different monitors because they had multiple programs they had to check, one for engineering documents, one for the inspection forms, one for rail link for the railroad reports, and different things that they were working in to make sure that they could align everything. And so that makes the job very difficult and full of human error. And really, you take away from actually inspecting the rail car and more from using the systems. That was one of them. The other big one we looked a lot at, pretty big facility that we were at, 750 rail cars, looking to grow to 1,000 on property. And a rail car is like a monument in a manufacturing facility. They're hard to move. They have to hit 7, 9 different stations throughout their life in the shop. And we kind of had, a ballpark idea of where they all were. We were pretty close, but it was all handwritten notes passed down from shift to shift to shift. And so you get a little bit of telephone in there that you're probably, not as accurate as you would like. And really, when you think about how to accurately switch a facility, that's a pretty important thing to know exactly where everything is at every single moment. And so that was another key focus as we started to think about how could we be better, where are things stuck. That opportunity came to the forefront as well.
Yeah, it's such an interesting scenario where you have, again, real experts doing this all day, every day for long portions of their career. But it's an opportunity where just a little bit of digitization and a little bit of compute power can significantly improve
Yeah.
what they're doing and how they're doing it. The nuance, though, is making sure that the system fits the ways of working. I know that's something that you were really attuned to. How did you think about making sure the solutions that were developed fit the needs of the folks who are doing it day in, day out?
Well, I think the biggest thing right out of the gate is we made sure as you guys walked, you were partnered with the people doing the work. So, I'm not inspecting rail cars. So what I think might be the right answer may not be. So, making sure that you guys were connected with not only the experts at a corporate level, making sure we're hitting all the requirements, but, when we partnered you with an inspector, we picked an inspector who was very knowledgeable, knew how to inspect a rail car, but was also someone who was willing to say what was wrong, but also wasn't overly, doom and gloom, had suggestions about what could be better, and was a person who wanted to be part of the process. And, that wasn't an accident. I spoke with the production manager about who to pick, talked about criteria, and then saying, let's make sure he understands that this is a safe environment and these are people who we want to trust and help us build something for the future.
This process can often bubble up lots of different
Mm.
places to play, lots of different opportunities, things that could potentially be fixed. What kind of advice might you have for an executive in a role similar to yours on how to think about navigating those different individual problems and being able to organize them in a way that you can take action and actually get the support of leadership to take a meaningful step forward when it feels like there's so many different things that could be done?
Yeah. What we used is really daily management and up through strategy deployment, and kind of use that to bubble up all the opportunities. And I think it comes with time as you empower a team to start to think about what are the critical things for their facility. At a corporate level, we think about here's the key things we want to see across all facilities, but also giving a little bit of autonomy for some of the shops to identify what are the key things for them. So as we use daily management, have the shops actually create their own level where they identify here are the overall goals, here are the projects that are going to drive this facility to improve and be better. And so, one, you have the sharing where you're sharing all the best ideas, and two, you have a facility with some ability to really look at what are the key things for that facility. What you don't want to do is say, especially at my level, everybody has to do this, everybody has to do this project. And at the beginning, we did some of that because there were some fundamental issues that we had. And we knew that, one, it was a way to get CI culture in there, running material Kaizens everywhere, and it would provide benefit everywhere. But as we grew and as we grew into a culture, it really became, okay, where do we need to focus? And every facility had their own playbook for, what are the key projects they need to do to deliver, along with the fundamental things that allow them to be successful.
That continuous improvement mindset is also very instrumental when you're looking at a problem that feels discrete, but can really benefit from a platform approach,
Mhm.
right? So whether that's like document organization or trying to find a consistent, implementable solve across a number of what seems like siloed challenges, that platform orientation, right, and that holistic continuous improvement mindset makes a big difference, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, I think as we think about ourselves as one team, you start to share ideas and share opportunities across. And so, what actually happens, as a team, we met weekly to talk through issues. And so you see things bubble up. I had one on ones with, my direct reports, plant managers once a month at least. Every month, we were doing report outs from every facility. And what you start to see is themes and some of those key things that become, to your point, platform issues. Especially when one person brings something up and says, "Hey, this is a problem," and everybody else says, "Yeah, that's really tough," or "That doesn't work well." And then you start to think about, okay, how do we make that better, and how are we going to improve that? And some of the IT projects come from that, right? As we think about how do we create a better system or better process, like looking for documents or looking for drawings or trying to figure out how do we make an inspector their life easier so that they don't have to do a research project for every single car to make sure it's repaired correctly.
I'd love to go into that document problem just briefly because I do think that is the type of challenge that scales beyond just something that you might see in the railcar maintenance world,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have a unusually large number of documents related to any one individual car, its history, its work history, how to repair it, and that's a bit of like a mess to manage from a document standpoint. I think anybody working on a shop floor can see a similar parallel to machines on their line that have a complicated work span, lifespan, and repair procedures. How did you think about solving that problem of organizing documentation and making that job easier for the folks who were trying to set the course for what needed to be done with a given rail car?
Yeah, and I'll start with where we were going and then kind of where we came to with TXI coming on board. A rail car can last for, depending on its economic repair limit, can last, 40, 50, 60 years, depending on, what its use is, the type of rail car, and some of those things. Well, GATX also bought and sold rail cars throughout the market. And so what that means is it's tough to make sure, one, all the documents are in a good, consistent format. They may have different builders. They may have been modified over time. They get AAR approval for, if you modify a drawing, but making sure that you have everything easily accessible, making sure that if there's 3 or 4 revisions that everybody knows where that revision is. And so GATX had a good document library, had everything available. The problem is you're relying on inspector to read and follow and make sure that everything is there, which they did a very, very good job at. It just took a lot of time. And so over the years when I was there, we talked a lot about, can we get this all in a standard format? Can we update all these drawings? Can we do all this? And it really was we need a handful of engineers to spend 2 or 3 years getting everything in the same format. And, this was a consistent problem for as long as I was there, and something inspectors complained about, shops complained about how difficult it was to fix a problem, right? When we sat down with TXI, as we were talking about, hey, we'd love to get the next project would be getting all these drawings in the same format so that they're part of the inspection record and we can do all that, but we've got to get our house in order and get all these documents in the right place before we can even think about that. And I forget who said it with the TXI group, but may have even been you, Jason, but someone said, why, right? And I just paused and I said, well, what do you mean by that? And they said, well, there's AI interfaces now where if you upload the documents, it can start to read in several different formats and start to understand what's going on, and maybe can find ways to start to point you in the right direction. We've got huge, not only drawings and references, and at the very least, if we can point an inspector to the right spot to look and the right places to go, you just streamline that activity, reduce the opportunity for mistakes. In addition, we've got huge manuals like welding manuals and welding instructions. And if you can narrow that down to the key points that make sense for the job they're doing, that can make us a lot more efficient on the inspection side. And then also, You got to believe it helps us be more accurate and more complete on the repair side.
Yeah. And I just love when stories like that kind of net out with real kind of tangible business benefits in terms of like reducing the time to complete tasks, giving the folks who are doing the work a greater sense of satisfaction and a sense of efficacy in terms of what it is that
Mhm.
they do. So I do love that part of the story. I doubt it was I who asked that question. I only say smart things here sitting in front of my laptop with a microphone. Completely useless out in the world.
Fair
Kidding.
enough.
Um, One other point I just wanted to touch on, you've talked about different situations where you've had to make a judgment call as it relates to thinking about when's the right case for using off the shelf software to try and solve a problem versus building something custom software that the organization will own and maintain going forward. As someone who's done it, what do you typically consider when you're choosing the path?
I've worked with different companies and used off the shelf and used some custom software. I would say really the big thing is what's the process that you're applying to. If it's something very stagnant that is not a key differentiator, right? It's not one of your core competencies. It's not something that you're going to constantly look to change and improve and be better at. Then it's probably something that's ideal for off the shelf, right? And there probably is something that works for it. It's very tactical, doesn't necessarily need a lot of complexity. If it's something that's going to evolve, change, you're going to want to improve, you're going to want to align it with processes. It makes sense for it to be custom in the sense that you're going to want to make sure that you can evolve and grow with that. I remember one off the shelf software I applied at a previous company, and we ended up having to change how we ran operations to create fictitious serial numbers or dummy numbers for parts because the system that we were using for manufacturing wasn't really made for manufacturing as an ERP system. And so we're coming up with a lot of different systems in the back end, which was creating a lot of issues and delaying production delivery of products. And so it was like really trying to force an off the shelf into something that didn't make sense. And really, when you think about manufacturing being your core competency and what you're trying to assemble, what you're trying to build, that software that goes with it really needs to adjust. And so, at GATX, one of the things they did have a decent amount of, custom software that had probably lasted a really long time, maybe even some of it longer than expected, because people were able to modify, adjust as we came up with issues. We could figure out what the real need was and find a way to adjust the system to match what production needed and do that relatively, I say relatively simply. The IT folks who I worked with would tell me it always took more than I gave it credit. But I think we saw the opportunity to get better. One example, we had a paperwork order and we had a paper time card and a paper uh, uh, log for their welding hours. There was a big debate. Do we use off the shelf like HR type record keeping or bookkeeping systems, or we make our own? And we really thought about what that system was trying to do and really understand productivity, efficiency, how long things were taking, put information on the floor, reduce the amount of time a skilled laborer was had a pencil in their hand and was filling out paperwork, and increase the amount of time they had a welding rod in their hand and was actually doing work on a rail car. Really, the idea was let's combine all these things and do these different things. And the off the shelf point blank just wouldn't do it. It could do a piece of it, it couldn't do all of it. And really, the goal was to do all of it. And so when we really thought about why do we collect this information, it made sense to invest the dollars to go after that. Really was pretty happy with the improvement. That's something you can continue to improve on, continue to evolve with.
That's great. I'll get you out of here on this last question. My experience has been that people who have spent time in the rail industry find it really unique and different from anything else that they've done. What was one thing that you really loved about the time you've spent in rail, and or one thing that was just so uniquely different about it than the other things that you've done in the course of your career?
I think probably the thing that I loved about it is the people, right? I think you'll find a lot of people, especially within the facilities, and I would say throughout the industry, who've been in the industry a really long time. Some of the facilities at GATX when I was there, people had worked there 40, 45 years.
Yeah.
30 years wasn't necessarily, it's a milestone, but it was like, yeah, you're still a newbie, right? Like, and That's crazy. So it's just a place where people have worked and we're really passionate about the industry. And that's the reason that it drew me in and the reason I moved to GATX and enjoyed it so much. I would say as far as maintenance, you can draw a lot of similarities between railcar maintenance and manufacturing. And I would say a lot of the processes and people and the continuous improvement mindset and the tools, they work, right? You can apply a lot of those things. In that ways, it's not so different. It's really harnessing that technology and making sure that we're trying to find ways to get better every day is really the similarities between the two.
I love that. James, thank you so much for being a guest with us today on the podcast. I always love talking with you. Hopefully, we'll get you out to one of our Modern Industrialist Exchange events and we can see each other in person and talk more rail. But thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experience with our audience.
Thank you, Jason. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it.
I want to extend another big thank you to James Chapman for joining us today. I think there's something incredibly valuable in hearing from leaders who have spent real time on the shop floor and in maintenance facilities alongside frontline teams. That experience really came through in today's conversation. If you'd like to connect with James and get more of his thinking around operations, continuous improvement, and industrial leadership, I'd encourage you to reach out to him on LinkedIn. Speaking of bringing industrial leaders together, one of the recurring themes in this conversation was the importance of collaboration, shared learning, and getting outside your own four walls to see how other organizations are approaching similar challenges. That's a big part of why we're continuing to build the Modern Industrialist Exchange community. On June 4th, we'll be hosting our next Modern Industrialist Exchange event in Chicago, focused on a topic that feels pretty relevant right now. Every driver knows this feeling. You ease off the accelerator when fog or bad weather rolls in. For transportation, logistics, and industrial leaders, the road ahead feels a bit uncertain. Tariffs, inflation, rising fuel costs, geopolitical disruption, the headwinds are real, but so is the opportunity hidden inside of that uncertainty. This event is going to be an honest conversation about how industrial leaders can make confident decisions when visibility is limited, and why some of the most resilient companies operate differently in moments like these. If you're interested in joining us, you can follow the link in the episode description below to get more information. The Modern Industrialist Exchange podcast features candid conversations with the operators and innovators shaping the future of manufacturing, supply chain, rail, fleet operations, and industrial services. As always, I thank you for joining us today. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe so you don't miss the next conversation we have coming up. We'll see you next time.